Hi there, it's Jeff here from the Wetsuit Centre, giving you a bit of guidance on what's the best wetsuit for the water sports that you do. So when choosing your wetsuit, yeah, it can be a little bit intimidating. There's a huge amount of choice and it's hard to know exactly what does what. So the key things that we ask when you're looking to buy a wetsuit is going to be what you're going to use it for, what you want the wetsuit to do, so in terms of is it going to be warmth over flexibility or flexibility over warmth, what time of year you're going to use it, so is it going to be primarily a winter wetsuit, so your warmth is obviously going to be a key, or is it going to be a summer wetsuit where more flexibility, and also what kind of budget you have. So what you're going to be using it for, what you want the wetsuit to do, so if you've got a preference of say flexibility, that would sort of lead us to believe that maybe it's going to be more for warmer water, so more for summer, and someone that doesn't feel the cold as much, someone that's going to be very mobile and moving around a lot is going to want more flexibility more than say warm, thick wetsuit, which might restrict them a little bit, like a winter wetsuit. So if you're using it for something like windsurfing, then obviously in the summer, then flexibility is key. So you're going to be using the boom around a lot. You're going to want something that's very sort of flexible in the upper body. And it's the same with sailing as well. Some people will buy a cheaper wetsuit, which was ill-fitting, and they'll find they get very cold, and because they're moving a lot, because the suit isn't as flexible as it should be, sometimes they get a lot of abrasions on their body and sort of a lot of rash and rub. So it's really important to get a wetsuit which is going to be sort of match the sport that you're doing. So if you're using your upper body a lot, then it's definitely going to be something with a maximum amount of flexibility, good fit and comfort to ensure that you're warm but comfortable as well. And moving on to the sort of what time of year you're going to be using it, that's key obviously. If you want an all year round wetsuit, we might point you in the direction of something that's say between a 5mm wetsuit, which is the sort of thicker end of the wetsuit, it's more of a winter wetsuit, and a 3mm wetsuit, which is more of a summer wetsuit. So something like a 4mm wetsuit, which will cover the majority of the year without you getting too cold in winter or too warm in summer. And then you're going to be sort of thinking about your budget, how much you want to spend, because obviously the more that you spend, the more technical features you get from a wetsuit. Typically, they tend to get more stretchy and more flexible, so the neoprene within the wetsuit gets a higher quality. And also you get more technical features, things like thermal lining, liquid taping on the seams, and things like that throughout the wetsuit. And so it's really sort of key how much you want to spend on the wetsuit as well. So the most important thing is to actually get a good fitting wetsuit. And so it's fit over sort of cost, if you like, really, because you can have a £350 wetsuit, but if it doesn't fit well, it will let in water and you'll get cold. So it's all about choosing the right sort of brand that fits you very well. What people tend to do wrong is they tend to sort of pick a wetsuit which is not as good a fit as it should be. So they sort of compromise. And that can be the dangers of buying online, which is why we've got people that you can call and talk through, give you measurements to, and make sure you get a good fit. And then obviously if you pop into the wetsuit centre, you can also try the suit on and make sure it fits really well. Well, where you do have a lot of different thicknesses within a wetsuit. And typically they are geared up towards water temperature. Okay, so if you're talking about UK waters, you tend to have about sort of 3 or 4 different thicknesses. And you see that when you're actually looking at the wetsuit. So when you're looking to purchase the wetsuit, it will say 5mm, 3mm, 2mm. It's all sort of clearly specified. Typically, what you'd be looking at in the winter, so when we're talking about the core winter months, sort of November, December, January, February, March, where it gets quite chilly, the water temperature can get down to sort of as low as 6 degrees, then you're definitely going to be looking at a 5mm wetsuit as a minimum. 5mm dictates the thickest part of the wetsuit, so that tends to be on the core of the body, around the legs, and then it sort of thins out a bit around the upper part of the wetsuit where you need a bit more flexibility. Then you'll drop down to something like a 4.3, which tends to be better for sort of autumn or spring, or for people that feel the cold a lot through the summer. Most of the hooded wetsuits that we do that are really full on, they're like a 6.54 or even a 6.4 as well. We actually do a 7mm suit as well, which is just insanely thick, but we do send a lot of them to sort of Scandinavia and North Sea, those sort of places, so where you really need warmth. And then you'll slip down to a 3.2. 3.2 tends to be for the core summer months, so you're talking June, July, August, September, and then depending on your tolerance for the cold, you could wear it right the way through to November if it's a good sealed wetsuit. So that's a 3mm sort of thickness, 2mm on the arms, and then you drop right down to a 2. Or a 2.1, and that tends to be like a shorty, something like this. It's a 2.1, it's a very, very lightweight, extremely comfortable, and it's just basically meant to keep the cold off So really more for warm sunny days or for warm water. So that's a 2-1, and then you can just wear a jacket, which will typically be like a 1 mil or 1.5 mil as well. So there's loads and loads of options, but typically the more that you spend, the more features you get. And one of the key differences is with different thicknesses of wetsuit is the seam style. So with cheaper wetsuits that you tend to sort of find in supermarkets, or maybe even slightly up from that, you get what we call a flat lock stitching. And the flat lock stitching is basically where 2 pieces of neoprene are butted up together, much like this, and then stitched the whole way through. It's very robust, but it means that the stitching goes the whole way through the suit, which means that they do bleed water through, and so it's not going to be the warmest suit. But then as you start to spend a bit more, you get what we call a glued and blind stitched seam, which is basically where they stitch the wetsuit halfway through and then glue the other side shut and then tape it typically. And that will just seal the wetsuit to ensure that you don't get any water leaking through the seams. Okay. Typically, these sort of seams you will get with the more expensive wetsuits, but definitely the thicker wetsuits. So when we talk about the 4 mil and the 5 mil wetsuits, it's really imperative to have that to keep the water out, keep you in the water longer and give you more protection from the cold water. But also, when you move up from there, you also get things like liquid taping on the seams as well. So this is kind of what you get for your money. This is a very thin piece of rubber taping over the top of the seam, which will stop any water penetrating the seams and obviously keep more water out and keep you warmer for longer. So you kind of get what you pay for, really.